Good morning. Call to order the Portsmouth Port and Industrial Commission meeting for October 25th, 2022. Roll call vote, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Bethea is absent. Ms. McSwain?
Present.
Mr. Parr?
Present.
Ms. Rogers-Garner is absent. Mr. Williams?
Present.
Ms. Jackson?
Present.
And Ms. Allen.
Present.
Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you.
And Bill Moody is present.
I'm going to acknowledge y'all. You have before you the minutes of the September 27th, 2022 regular meeting. I will need a motion for approval and a second.
The minutes be approved as written.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. McSwain?
Yes.
Mr. Parr?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
And Ms. Allen.
Yes.
The motion is adopted.
Thank you. We have our financial report. Ms. Burchett. Good morning.
Morning. So I'll let Kiara present them. So she's the one behind the scenes preparing them, so.
And good morning, Ms. Hope.
Okay, so from last month, we do have a small reduction in accounts receivable. We received $140,000 of the Port Host grant. Scroll down. Okay, we have some accounts payables at $184,000. Okay, this is our revenues of $5,000. I believe was the industrial fees.
Yes, YMCA.
Yes. A few operating expenses, the normal insurance, a little bit of contractual services. And we ended with the net position of $1 million, a small increase of $2,052 overall. Not much activity.
So the bottom line is that during this month, during this year, they got, if you go to the next page, you have a year-to-date budget expense. So you have the 7,000 is a revenue, almost just short $4, 7,000 revenue, and expenses close to 5,000. The bottom line just for this year activity is $2,051 profitable. And if you need any details, we'll be glad to answer those.
Any questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, thank you so much. I'd like to acknowledge our city attorney, Ms. Graham Williams. Good morning. Our city manager, Madam Chair, or Madam Chapman. Good morning. And of course, our city council liaison, Councilman Moody. Thank you for being with us this morning. Old business, we have our Port of Virginia update. Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank y'all for hosting me this morning. I'll just provide a quick update on what's going on at the port. I know I do sound like a broken record from the last time I was here. We had 312,000 TEUs, another increase. To put that in perspective, we had never surpassed 300,000 TEUs in a month until May of 21. We have now hit 7 straight months over 300,000 TEUs. And so even as you may see the economy turn down, we are anticipating continuing to grow. Ideally, if things do slow down, we hope to slow down less than our competitor ports. So we've seen 25% growth in calendar year 21 versus 20, 15% growth in fiscal year 22 versus 21, and so far this calendar year, approximately 10% growth volume. So things are still going well. Fingers crossed they continue to. And so outside of volumes, you saw the construction start at PMT this past summer, as anticipated to be complete in 2025. The widening and deepening, so 2025 is a big year. The widening and deepening of the channel also anticipated to be complete in 2025. The two-way traffic portion of that, so the inner harbor, that's actually supposed to be done a little bit sooner. So, one of the unique advantages the port has is that once the widening is done, we will be the only port on the East Coast that can handle two-way traffic like any standard road out there. Right now, it's only one-way traffic. One ship comes in, it takes about 4 to 6 hours, and then the next ship can go out. It takes about 4 to 6 hours. So again, I'm no math major, but I imagine having two-way traffic will make you that much more efficient. It'll also make us the deepest port on the East Coast. So we've got some optimization projects going on, expanding the central rail yard, also looking at completion in 2024 for that. And then finally, I'll close with, we'll be at the career fair at Manor High School this Friday from 9 a.m. to noon. I think that's put together through the Access College Foundation. We'll have our manager of talent acquisition out there, again, 9 a.m. to noon this Friday. And happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Any questions for Mr. Cross? Mr. Parr?
From the Virginia Institute for Economic Development conference I went to, there was a lot of fanfare regarding the port, and rightly so. I was wondering if it would be possible to arrange for visits for the new commissioners that have joined since we conducted our initial visits last year. I think Commissioner Jackson
Yes.
would like to attend.
Absolutely. I'll get with you and we'll set something up. Happy to host you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Thank you.
2022 VMA International Trade Symposium. Mr. Donahue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really just an update to recap the PPIC's sponsorship of the VMA International Trade Symposium mixer, which you all did sponsor. I believe there were a number of you that attended. That was a week-long event that was hosted in Norfolk by the Virginia Maritime Association, and really an international conference and summit. I do believe I saw several of you at the mixer. We appreciated your sponsorship of that and attendance and participation. So just really wanted to recap that. I think that was a very informative week for our team, which was in attendance. I hope it was for the commissioners who joined as well.
Would any other commissioners who attended like to comment?
I don't comment. It was people everywhere. I mean, it was all kinds of network going on. I did have a little gig from it, but I lost my card. But it was wonderful, and for those who didn't attend, it had shrimp was everywhere, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. On to the Virginia Institute of Economic Development.
So I
Mr. Parr.
had the pleasure of attending the conference in Richmond, and I wanted to share a couple of takeaways from one of these site selectors that gave a presentation. I met with him after to ask specifically for Portsmouth, having worked with Portsmouth before, finding these different real estate options for these large, be they national, be they domestic companies. And he said, for his advice, his name is Chris Lloyd. He works for McGuire Woods in Richmond. He's one of 60 site selectors that belong to this guild. And so if you've heard of Lego that recently moved to their mega site in Central Virginia, he was a part of that deal. That was one mega project that Virginia captured last year, or this year rather. In working with Portsmouth, he stated that he had 4 pieces of advice for us I wanted to share with the other commissioners as well as with city leadership, discussing fast-tracking permitting. Some localities have an ombudswoman when it comes to these projects who can kind of cut through the red tape on the 4th floor. So when it comes to planning, and the reason that he suggested this was construction costs due to inflation and supply chain, and I'm sure as Commissioner Williams knows, can fluctuate very much from day to day, and especially week to week and month to month. And so having an ombudsman that perhaps works with the PPIC, the EDA, and these large companies who are looking to relocate here in Portsmouth could be a comparative advantage for us in not only Hampton Roads, but in the whole Commonwealth. He also discussed ways that we could implement incentives, and I was happy to share with him our job creation grant as well as the other grants at the EDA. And he thought that they were excellent, that we had very, very much covered the board, both from a state level and a locality level. We want business to relocate in Portsmouth. He did discuss tax policy and stated that perhaps in the past there had been some conflict or how do I put this nicely? There had been some discussion about a heavy machinery and tool tax, perhaps too onerous of these taxes that would make businesses perhaps reconsider relocating to Portsmouth. We've had attendance by the Commissioner of Revenue's representative for a couple of our meetings, and I think that's an ongoing discussion that we have. That doesn't really pertain to this body necessarily, but he did put that out there. And then lastly, he discussed workforce. Not just having shovel-ready ground, but having people ready and willing to work. And I was happy to share with him our Portsmouth at Work initiatives, and he was delighted to hear about them, the certifications, things going along with PCC and offshore wind. And he thought as far as numbers 2 and 4, we were doing an excellent job. There's perhaps just some improvements to make on points 1 and 3. So it was an excellent conference, and if it happens again next year, I would really encourage the other commissioners to attend. It was excellent.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that feedback. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. I'd like to move on to new business. And with new business, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Commissioner Parr for receiving the Inside Business Top 40 Under 40 recently. So congratulations, Mr. Parr. Okay, our CYA revenue bond. Mr. Miller.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. This item is a relatively simple request, but I'm going to take a little time to explain the background of it so that it's clear what's being asked. PPIC is one of the few governmental entities in the Commonwealth that has the power to issue something called a qualified 501c3 tax-exempt bond. And that is a tax-exempt bond that can be used by nonprofits. The charter was amended back in 2007 to give PPIC that power. And it's been used a couple of times. It was used for the Churchland YMCA some time ago. That bond has since been refinanced, so it's no longer on your books. The second was in 2019, and that was some folks in Chantilly, Virginia, came to us, and they have a sport and community center, and we're doing a $4.8 million project on it. And they asked PPIC to issue a 501c3 revenue bond for that. A little bit on how bonds work in general. There are a couple types of bonds. You can have a publicly marketed bond, which is what you'll often see with the cities. General fund revenue bonds that goes out to the public and people can buy them. There's also what's called a private placement bond, which is a bond that just a bank buys the whole thing. And a private placement bond is what these issuances are, and they are really just a loan between the bank on one side and the borrower on the other. PPIC's involvement is only to put its name on the documents and get paid a fee. And we get paid, I think it's 1% of the outstanding principal balance of the bond every year. So, for example, I think this past year we received about $5,000, Brian, is that correct?
5502.
Okay.
That's the fee.
We have no liability whatsoever on the bonds. We have no involvement with the bonds, really. It really is just works like a loan between the bank and the borrower, other than our name being there. Why do people use tax-exempt bonds? The interest on tax-exempt bonds is tax-exempt, meaning that the bank, the bank issues you a mortgage and you pay interest on it, the bank has to pay tax on that interest that it receives. For these bonds, the bank doesn't have to pay tax on the interest that it gets back. That lets the bank give the borrower a lower interest rate, so the savings is passed on in part to the borrower. The downside of them is that there are a lot more transactional costs up front. You know, you have to have a lot more documents, you have to have a bond counsel. So you really need a larger project, a $4 or $5 million project, in order to make tax-exempt bonds worthwhile. But if you do have that amount, then they are worth it. All right, with all that as background, here's the specific question for the board. The bond documents that were originally set up require the borrower to do a full annual audit every year. And Freedom Bank, which bought the bonds, is willing at the borrower's request to waive that audit requirement and just have a reviewed audit, which is a much lesser standard, is cheaper for the borrower. And Freedom Bank is fine with that. Technically, they could probably do this between themselves, waive that requirement, but they've asked us, since our name is on the documents, to go ahead and consent to that as well. So what they're asking is that we consent to Freedom Bank's waiver of the full annual audit requirement in the bond documents. Again, we have no liability on these. We simply get a payment every year. The payment's determined by outstanding principal amount, so it has nothing to do with the organization's financials. So we just recommend that we, and I think we can do this by consensus rather than a formal, well, we should do it by vote, but we don't need a formal resolution on it. Simply agree to the waiver of the requirement to the extent that Freedom Bank agrees to the waiver. Are there any questions?
Mr. Parr?
Are you able to share a bit of the history of how the Chantilly project came to us? Was there a personal relationship with the commissioner, or they were seeking out a body that could issue these bonds?
I think the latter, and I think the reason they came to us is that there's a gentleman named Bill Nussbaum with Williams Mullen. He's a bond attorney. I think he was involved with PPIC's getting the charter amendment back in 2007, so he's aware of the board's powers, and I think he suggested us to Chantilly.
Any other questions or concerns? Mr. Parr?
Are we able to see the last audit, or is that between the borrower and the lender only?
We could see it, but there's no real benefit to us from it. Yeah.
Because we have no liability.
We have no liability, and the amount is based on the outstanding debt, which is from the bank's records anyway, not the organization's financials.
Madam City Attorney, what is your perspective?
I support this. I think there's really no downside to the organization, and it allows for the flow of information to work more easily between the borrower and the lender. And I think it speaks volumes that they are asking us to be a part of it when they really don't need to. So I support this, and I think the board should vote for it.
Madam City Manager?
I concur.
Councilman?
Yes, and at the time, council was fully briefed on it, approved it, and once again, there's no liability, so I don't see any need for us to be privy to the audit, given it's no liability. So.
Thank you. Barring any other questions or concerns, I'll need a motion and a second to approve the CYA revenue bond.
So moved.
Yeah, I think the motion would be to approve the waiver of the audit requirement in the
Okay.
COA bond documents to the extent of Freedom Bank's waiver.
Okay. You said a lot.
We support the waiver.
I need a second.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's move for a roll call vote, please.
Ms. McSwain?
Yes.
Mr. Parr?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
And Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Chair, the motion is adopted.
Thank you. Our next item is the grant letter of support. Mr. Donahue.
Yes, this is related to a request that was received at your September meeting. I do believe the subject may have come up prior to that as well, but it was raised by Commissioner Parr, and it was in regards to a letter of support for a city infrastructure grant application that was being submitted at the time. To my knowledge, at least since my time serving the board, I'm not aware of any letters of support that have been issued by the PPIC. In this particular situation, the letter of support was actually needed back in September, so the specific grant application has been submitted. I believe the city was unfortunately not successful in obtaining that grant, but we did think it was worth bringing this to you today for perhaps development of a policy going forward, so that if there is ever a request for a letter of support, there would be some sort of policy so we could act quickly in issuing that on behalf of the PPIC. So, Madam Chair, my request would be for there to be some sort of policy enacted, if you desired, so that you as the chair or the vice chair as designee could go ahead and issue that letter, so long as it is in keeping with the PPIC's mission and objectives.
I'll ask my colleagues on the board their perspective on that. Ms. Jackson?
I think it'll be productive, and it's a letter of support. Like, who doesn't want support? I don't think it's something that would hurt, the commission, or I think it'll help us more than anything.
To develop a policy?
Yeah.
Mr. Williams?
I concur.
Ms. McSwain?
That's right, be ready so we won't have to get ready.
Mr. Carr?
Agreed.
Okay. Councilman, any thoughts on that?
I concur.
Madam Manager?
I concur as well.
Madam City Attorney?
Nothing to add.
All right.
And I would just ask our Deputy City Attorney, I believe that consensus is sufficient in terms of matter
To create a policy.
policy.
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Well, very good. Well, thank you. That will be of great assistance to staff, I think, in responding to these requests as they come in, and we'll certainly advise and inform the board of any activity on that.
Okay, I can work together on that.
Great.
Okay, at this point, we do have a need to go into a closed meeting. So, Mr. Williams, I ask that you read our motion.
I move to go into a closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.3 for the purpose of discussing the disposition of real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically regarding 3920 Portsmouth Road.
We have a motion on the floor. We need a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Ms. McSwain?
Yes.
Mr. Parr?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
And Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Motion is adopted. We are now in closed meeting.
Each commissioner certify that to the best of his or her knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I need a second.
Second.
Moved and properly second. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Ms. McSwain?
Yes.
Mr. Parr?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
And Ms. Allen?
Yes.
Motion is adopted.
Thank you. Items submitted by commissioners. We have none at this time, correct?
Not to my knowledge, unless there are any
I'm going to do the report
board would like
back.
to share.
Mr. Parr?
Could we get an update on the 7th Street property? I don't believe we've discussed that in a while.
We can, if I can bring that to you at your November meeting. I'd like to
Sure.
reach out to the Redevelopment and Housing Authority and check on the status on their end.
Sure.
Any other items to be submitted? Hearing none, report backs. I, at the request of the board at our last meeting, reached out to Chairman Smith of the EDA in reference to a joint retreat. At this time, they have some retreat business that they'd like to handle independently. We are invited to attend their retreat, however, not to be a participant in the retreat at this time. We will go back and rediscuss it again at a later date. That's it for me.
Chair, I had no other report backs. Checking on my notes, I believe we've addressed all items from your last meeting.
Okay. Barring hearing no other items, the agenda has been fulfilled and we are adjourned.